A young Mustang Foal, lost in a brutal snowstorm, was not expected to survive. Freezing and starving, he barely clung to life. Just as all hope seems lost, fate intervenes. What happened next would change everything. Prepare for an emotional journey of survival, trust, and the unbreakable bond between a man and a wild horse. The wind howled like a wounded beast, whipping through the valley with an unforgiving chill. Snow fell relentlessly, blurring the horizon into a featureless white void. Amid the storm, barely visible against the frozen landscape, a small, fragile figure struggled to keep moving. A wild Mustang Foal, no more than a few months old, staggered through the knee-deep snow. His golden brown coat, once sleek and full of life, was now dull and speckled with frost. His tiny hooves sank with every desperate step, his breath coming in weak, ragged gasps. He had been wandering for hours, maybe longer. Time had lost all meaning since he'd been separated from his herd. The blizzard had come suddenly, a wall of ice and wind sweeping across the plains without warning. The herd had run, their survival instincts kicking in, but the foal, still too young to keep up, had fallen behind. The storm had swallowed their figures within seconds, leaving him alone, completely alone. He had cried out, his high-pitched whinnies lost to the deafening roar of the wind. He had tried to follow their fading scent, but the snow had covered every trace. His small body, built for the wild, was fighting to stay warm, but the cold was winning. His legs buckled, and he collapsed, the snow swallowing him instantly. His body trembled as the last remnants of warmth drained away. His breathing slowed, the frost biting at his skin. His dark eyes fluttered closed. He was too tired to keep going. Somewhere in the distance, past the howling wind, the sound of crunching hooves echoed through the valley. Jack Holloway gritted his teeth against the freezing air, adjusting the thick wool scarf wrapped around his face. The storm had arrived faster than he'd anticipated, turning what was supposed to be a routine trip into a fight for survival. His horse, a strong bay gelding named Rust, moved steadily beneath him, navigating the deep snow with careful steps. Jack had lived in these mountains long enough to know one thing. If you got caught in a blizzard, you moved fast or you didn't move at all. But something didn't feel right. Rust's ears flicked forward, his breath puffing in white clouds. He hesitated, nostrils flaring. Jack knew that something was out there. "Easy, boy," Jack muttered, tightening his grip on the reins. His sharp blue eyes scanned the swirling white landscape, searching for movement. Then, a shape in the snow. At first, it didn't look like much, just another mound of ice and frost. But as Jack rode closer, his chest tightened. It was an animal, jumping down from the saddle. He moved quickly, crunching through the deep snow. His boots sank as he knelt beside the small, unmoving form. His heart clenched a foal. The little Mustang was barely breathing, his body stiff, ice clinging to his eyelashes, his flanks barely rising. Jack pressed a gloved hand against the colt's side. His skin was frozen to the touch. "Damn it," he muttered. He'd seen horses in bad shape before, but this was a death sentence. For a long moment, Jack hesitated. He had spent years avoiding this, getting close, caring. He knew what it was like to lose something you love, and he had promised himself he'd never go through that again. But as he looked down at the foal, as he felt the faintest rise and fall of the colt's breath under his fingers, something in him broke. With a heavy sigh, he yanked off his thick wool coat and wrapped it around the foal's frozen body. "Come on, kid. Don't quit on me now." Gathering the foal in his arms, he lifted him with effort, his muscles straining. The Mustang was light to light for his age. The storm had already stolen too much from him. Jack carried him back to Rust, securing the bundle of shivering bones across the saddle. He swung himself up behind, gripping the foal tightly against his chest. "We're getting you home," he murmured, spurring Rust forward. The wind howled louder as if trying to tear the foal from his grasp, but Jack wasn't letting go. Not this time. He pushed Rust as fast as he dared through the storm, his body shielding the foal from the brutal wind. Every breath burned his lungs, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't. The foal was still alive, but just barely. Jack could feel the weak rise and fall of the young horse's ribs beneath the thick wool coat he had wrapped around him. He was dangerously close to slipping away. "Stay with me, kid," Jack muttered under his breath, urging Russ forward. The cabin wasn't far now, a small wooden structure tucked deep into the Wyoming wilderness, standing firm against the howling winds. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and warmth was the only thing that could keep the foal alive. Jack's hands were numb as he reached the cabin door. He slid from the saddle, barely feeling the frozen leather beneath his gloves, holding the foal tightly against his chest. He kicked the door open and stepped inside. The cabin was dark, but Jack moved with purpose. He strode straight to the fireplace, lowering the foal onto a thick bed of hay near the cold hearth. With shaking hands, he grabbed the pile of wood stacked in the corner and worked quickly. Flint sparked, and within moments, a fire roared to life, filling the room with much-needed warmth. Jack knelt beside the foal, pulling the wool coat away from his small frame. His golden brown coat was still covered in frost, his legs stiff and unmoving. Jack swore under his breath. The foal's condition wasn't improving fast enough. He needed more than warmth, he needed circulation. Jack grabbed an old towel and began rubbing the colt's body, his movements firm but careful. "You're tougher than this," Jack muttered, working over the foal's legs. "Mustangs don't quit easily." The young horse let out a faint breath, his ears flicking slightly at the sound of Jack's voice. It wasn't much, but it was something. Jack kept working, massaging warmth back into the colt's limbs, talking to him the way he used to talk to his own horses before he lost everything. Hours passed. The storm outside raged on, the wind battering against the cabin walls. But inside, something was changing. Jack noticed it first when he reached for the towel again and felt movement, slow, weak, but movement. His breath caught as the foal lifted his head just barely, dark eyes meeting Jack's, glassy but alive. Jack let out a slow breath, something tight in his chest loosening for the first time in years. "There you go, kid," he whispered. "Took you long enough." The foal blinked at him, his breathing still slow but steady now. Jack knew they weren't out of the woods yet. The colt was still weak, still fragile. But the worst part, the freezing death that had nearly taken him, was over. Jack leaned back, exhaling as he rubbed his hands over his face. Exhaustion crept in, but he didn't move away from the foal, not yet. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. The blizzard was still raging. But now Jack wasn't just waiting for the storm to pass. He was waiting to see if this small, fragile Mustang could fight its way back to life. And maybe, just maybe, Jack was starting to realize that he was fighting for something too. The storm had finally passed. Outside, the world was buried under a thick blanket of snow. The once fierce winds were now nothing more than a distant whisper. The morning sun tried to pierce through the heavy clouds, casting a dim light over the frozen valley. Inside the cabin, warmth had returned thanks to the steady fire Jack had kept burning throughout the night. He sat in his worn-out armchair, watching the foal with tired but focused eyes. The young Mustang had survived the night. That was a miracle on its own. But surviving wasn't the same as living. Jack had seen enough animals to know the signs. The colt was still dangerously weak. His body was no longer stiff with cold, but his limbs barely moved. His breathing was steady but shallow, his small, delicate head resting against the pile of hay Jack had gathered for him. He wasn't out of danger yet. Jack ran a hand down his face, exhaling slowly. He wasn't sure why he had done this, why he had risked himself, fought through the storm, and brought this half-dead Mustang into his cabin. He wasn't supposed to care anymore. He had lost too much already. Jack clenched his jaw. This wasn't about him. The colt needed to get stronger, and for that, he needed to stand. Jack got to his feet, moving cautiously toward the foal. The young horse's ears flicked at the sound of movement, but he didn't lift his head. "All right, kid," Jack murmured. "You're not going to get any better just lying there." Kneeling beside the foal, he placed his hands carefully on the colt's small frame. The young horse tensed slightly, but didn't fight. He was too weak for that. Jack worked slowly, massaging the foal's legs, encouraging blood flow. The colt let out a faint breath, his body twitching under Jack's hands. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he moved a small shift, just his front legs stretching ever so slightly against the hay. Jack stilled, watching closely. "Come on, kid," he muttered, his voice low, almost pleading. The foal tried again, his back legs trembling, barely responding. He struggled, his muscles weak from the hours spent frozen in the snow. Jack's breath caught. Then the foal pushed. His legs wobbled violently, but he lifted himself off the hay just enough for Jack to see the determination flicker in his dark eyes. Jack felt something twist in his chest. The colt didn't want to give up, and neither did Jack. But just as the young Mustang started to find his balance, something outside shattered the quiet. A low, deep howl echoed through the valley. Jack's head snapped up, his entire body going rigid. The foal flinched at the sound, his ears flattening against his head. Jack's gut tightened. Wolves. And judging by how close that sound was, they had picked up on something. Jack's pulse hammered. As he reached for his rifle, he had spent enough time in the wild to know one thing for sure. A starving wolf pack was a problem. No man wanted on his doorstep. And right now, he wasn't just protecting himself anymore. The silence after the storm was deceiving. Snow blanketed the valley in an eerie stillness, the wind nothing more than a distant whisper. But Jack knew better. Silence in the wild didn't always mean safety. Sometimes it meant something was watching. He had felt it before he heard it, that prickle along his spine, the instinct whispering that danger lurked nearby. And then the sound confirmed it. A low, guttural howl rolled through the trees, slicing through the cold air like a knife. Jack's breath steadied, but his pulse quickened. Wolves, Rust, still tied near the cabin, snorted sharply, shifting on his hooves, his ears flicking in every direction, sensing the danger before he could see it. Jack moved toward the window, rifle in hand. Through the frost-covered glass, he scanned the tree line. At first, there was nothing but snow and shadows. Then movement. A shape emerged from the whiteness, a large black wolf. Jack swore under his breath. He knew wolves well enough to recognize an alpha when he saw one, and where there was an alpha, there was a pack. He didn't have long to think. Another figure appeared, then another, 3, no, 4. They moved silently, their bodies sleek against the snow, golden eyes locked onto the cabin. They weren't rushing in, they were testing him. Jack's grip tightened on the rifle. If he didn't act now, they might decide to come closer. Behind him, the foal let out a weak, nervous snort. He was still too weak to stand. His small body curled against the hay near the fire. He wouldn't survive if the wolves got in. Jack made his decision. He moved toward the door and stepped outside. The freezing air bit into his skin instantly. But he didn't care. This was about survival. The moment he appeared, the wolves stopped. Their yellow eyes locked onto him. The black wolf, the alpha, took a slow step forward. Jack raised his rifle, aiming just above their heads. Bang! The shot echoed through the valley, shaking the silence apart. Snow from the trees tumbled down. In thick clouds, the wolves flinched at the sound, their ears flattening against their skulls. But they didn't run. Jack cursed under his breath. Damn, they were desperate. A hungry pack wouldn't scare off that easily. He took a step forward, making himself bigger. Predators respected dominance. If he backed down, they'd take it as weakness. The alpha growled, low in its throat, muscles tense, tail flicking. It wasn't ready to give up either. For several long seconds, neither moved. Then, something shifted. One of the smaller wolves took a cautious step back. Another followed. The pack was wavering. Jack raised his voice, firm and commanding. Not today. The black wolf snarled once more but hesitated. It flicked its tail, eyes still locked onto Jack's. Then, it turned. The rest followed, one by one, melting back into the trees, vanishing into the shadows. Jack didn't lower his rifle until the last shape disappeared. Only then did he exhale, his breath forming a thick cloud in the freezing air. He turned back toward the cabin, his body tense, still running on adrenaline. But as he stepped inside, his gaze immediately found the foal. The young Mustang had lifted his head slightly, his dark eyes staring right at Jack. Jack let out a small breath. Looks like we made it, kid. The foal blinked at him as if he understood. The sun was rising over the valley, casting a pale golden glow over the endless snow. The storm was gone, but its effects lingered. Trees stood heavy with ice, and the world was eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. Jack stood outside the cabin, staring at the tree line where the wolves had vanished hours earlier. He hadn't slept. He had spent most of the night watching, waiting for their return, but they hadn't come back, not yet. His body ached from the cold, exhaustion weighing on him like a lead blanket, but he wasn't ready to rest. There was still work to do, inside the cabin. The foal let out a small, strained breath. Jack turned, stepping back in. The heat from the fire was immediate, warming his frozen skin, but his focus was on the young Mustang curled up on the hay. The colt had survived the night. That alone was a miracle, but Jack knew better than to celebrate too soon. The real fight was just beginning. The foal was still weak, his breathing steady but slow. He hadn't tried to stand again since yesterday, and if he didn't start moving soon, he never would. Jack ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. He had spent most of his life around horses, but this was different. The foal wasn't just another animal. He was something else entirely. Jack crouched beside him, his voice low but firm. "All right, kid. Time to see if you've got some fight in you." He reached out, placing his hands gently on the colt's side. The young Mustang flinched slightly at the touch but didn't resist. Jack began massaging the foal's legs, just as he had done the night before, working warmth into the stiff muscles. Slowly, he moved his hands, urging the colt to react, to fight back. At first, nothing. Then, a twitch. Jack stilled, watching closely. The foal shifted slightly, his muscles trembling, his front legs moving just a fraction, pushing against the hay. His breathing quickened, his ears flicking at the sensation. Jack felt something tighten in his chest. "Come on, kid." The Mustang tried again, his front legs stretching, struggling under his own weight. His back legs wobbled, refusing to cooperate. Jack didn't move, barely breathing as he watched. Then, with a sudden push, the foal lifted himself not fully. His legs buckled almost immediately, sending him back onto the hay. But it was a start. Jack exhaled slowly. "That's it. That's what I needed to see." The colt blinked at him, his body still trembling. He was exhausted, but Jack had seen it, the fight, the instinct, and that meant he had a chance. Jack sat back, rubbing his hands over his face. He had told himself that this was temporary, that he would help the foal recover and then let him go. But now, watching the Mustang fight to live, something was changing. The door rattled against the wind, snapping. Jack from his thoughts. Rust snorted loudly from outside. Jack frowned, standing quickly. He knew his horse. Something had spooked him. He grabbed his rifle and stepped onto the porch. The valley was quiet. The wind had settled, and the tree line was still. But Jack wasn't fooled. He wasn't alone. Then, from a distance, the sound of hooves against ice. Jack's heart slammed against his ribs. He knew that sound: horses. And if horses were coming this far up the valley, that could only mean one thing: men. The rhythmic pounding of hooves against the frozen ground sent a sharp pulse through Jack's chest. He knew that sound. It wasn't wild horses. It was riders. And riders meant trouble. Jack stepped off the porch, his rifle firm in his grip as he scanned the valley. The snow-covered expanse stretched for miles, but against the pale morning light, dark figures emerged in the distance. 3 men on horseback, moving deliberately. Jack's gut tightened. He had spent the last few years avoiding people living out here for a reason. No one came this deep into the valley unless they had business or a problem to deal with. Rust stomped his hooves nervously as the riders drew closer. Jack gave his horse a reassuring pat, but didn't move. He wasn't the kind of man to run from trouble. As the riders neared, Jack could make out more details. Their horses were tough, built for endurance, their coats dusted with frost. The men wore heavy coats and wide-brimmed hats, their breath visible in the freezing air. Ranchers, maybe trackers. Jack's jaw tightened. The lead rider, a broad-shouldered man with a thick gray beard, pulled his horse to a stop a few feet away. He surveyed Jack with sharp, calculating eyes. "Morning," the man said, his voice rough from years of cold winters and hard work. Jack didn't lower his rifle. "Morning." The man glanced at the cabin, then at the corral. "Didn't think anyone still lived up this way." Jack didn't answer. Silence had a way of making men uncomfortable. One of the younger riders shifted in his saddle. "Are you alone up here?" Jack's grip on the rifle tightened just slightly. "Depends on who's asking." The older man studied him for a moment, then let out a slow breath. "Name's Elias Turner. We run cattle about 20 miles south of here. We lost a few mares in the storm. We figured they might have run this way." Jack's muscles stayed tense. He knew where this was going. Elias's eyes drifted past Jack toward the cabin. "Have you seen any stray horses?" Jack didn't move, because right behind him, inside that cabin, was the foal. And if these men were looking for wild horses, they wouldn't hesitate to take him. Jack's silence made the younger rider shift again. He was itching for an answer. Elias, however, was patient, a man who knew how to read people. Jack finally spoke. "Haven't seen any horses." It wasn't exactly a lie. The foal wasn't just any horse. Elias nodded slowly, as if considering whether or not to believe him. Then, without another word, he dismounted. Jack tensed. The older man moved toward Rust, running a hand along the gelding's flank. "Fine horse," he commented. "You ride alone?" Jack didn't answer. Elias exhaled, then turned back to Jack, his expression unreadable. "A wild Mustang Foal wouldn't have survived that storm." The words landed like a challenge, a test. Jack held his ground. "Then I guess you're looking for a dead horse." Silence stretched between them. Then, to Jack's surprise, Elias grinned. "Fair enough." He adjusted his coat, then stepped back toward his horse. "If you do see any strays, let us know." Jack nodded. Once, the younger rider, still suspicious, hesitated, his eyes narrowing. But when Elias swung back onto his saddle, the others followed without another word. They turned their horses and rode off, disappearing into the white haze of the valley. Jack didn't move until the sound of hooves faded. Only then did he exhale. He turned back to the cabin. Inside, the foal lay curled in the hay, oblivious to how close he had just come to losing his freedom. Jack ran a hand through his hair. What the hell was he doing? He had just lied for this horse, lied to men who had every reason to come back. Jack had spent the last few years surviving alone, avoiding responsibility. He wasn't the kind of man who took and lost animals. But now, for the first time, he wasn't sure he could let this one go. The valley had returned to silence. The storm was gone. The wolves had vanished, and now the riders were just a fading memory. But Jack knew better than to think it was over. For years, he had lived in peace, isolated from the world. And now, in just a few days, everything had changed, all because of a wild Mustang Foal he was never supposed to find. He spent the morning checking the perimeter, making sure the men weren't coming back. Russ was restless, sensing the tension that still lingered in the air. But inside the cabin, things were different. The foal was standing. Jack stopped at the doorway, his chest tightening at the sight before him. The young Mustang, who had been too weak to move just days ago, now stood on shaky legs. He was still fragile, still recovering. But there was a fire in his eyes now, the wild spirit that made him a Mustang. Jack let out a slow breath. The moment he had been avoiding had finally arrived. The foal was strong enough to run, strong enough to leave. Jack grabbed an old blanket and a makeshift rope halter. He wasn't planning to tie the colt down, just guide him outside for the first time since the storm. "Come on, kid," he murmured, moving slowly. The Mustang let out a soft whinny, hesitant. But when Jack stepped back toward the door, the foal followed. Sunlight reflected off the untouched snow as they stepped outside. The Mustang flinched slightly at the cold, feeling it for the first time since the blizzard. But he didn't back away. Jack watched as the young horse lifted his head, breathing in the crisp air, sensing the open land in front of him. It was time. Jack loosened the rope and stepped back. The Mustang hesitated for a moment, then moved first, cautiously, testing his own strength, then faster until he was running. Jack felt his chest tighten as he watched the foal race across the valley, free, wild, exactly as he was meant to be. But just as the Mustang reached the ridge, he stopped. Jack frowned. He had expected the foal to disappear without looking back, but instead, the young horse turned. Their eyes met. Jack felt something shift deep inside him. The Mustang let out a call, a soft, high-pitched whine. Jack swallowed hard. "Go on, kid." But the foal didn't go. He came back, at first trotting, then slowing until he stopped just a few feet from Jack. The silence between them was heavy. Jack didn't move. He didn't want to believe what was happening. The Mustang could run anywhere, but he chose to stay. For a long moment, Jack just stood there, staring at the horse, and then he understood. The foal didn't belong to the wild anymore. He belonged to Jack. A quiet chuckle escaped Jack's lips as he shook his head. "So that's how it's going to be." "Huh," the Mustang huffed, eyes gleaming. Jack ran a hand over his face, then stepped forward, placing a firm but gentle palm against the foal's neck. Beneath his touch, he felt strength. He felt a heartbeat. And for the first time in years, Jack felt like he wasn't alone anymore. The silence of the valley no longer felt empty, because now he had a companion. And this time, he wasn't letting go. Sometimes, the things we try hardest to push away are the things we need the most. Jack thought he had saved the Mustang, but in the end, maybe it was the Mustang that saved him. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel. Leave a like and share it with someone who loves inspiring stories like this one.